A landmark report into shift work in the mining and energy industry has just been released. It's the biggest of its kind, and to discuss it I'm joined by two of its authors, David Peats and Georgina Murray from Griffith University. David, what's the purpose of the report?
Well, mining is a high-profile, valuable industry, and it's got very high wages, which normally are associated with low labour turnover, and yet it's got amongst the highest rates of labour turnover in the country. So that suggests there's some reason why workers are leaving, because normally that doesn't happen. And we wanted to find out, why is it that there's such apparent dissatisfaction in the industry? And it also followed on from some earlier research that we'd been doing, looking at women in the industry.
We wrote a book finished writing our book in 2010, which is called Women in the Coal Rushes, and we visited these coal mining communities in the Bowen Basin, and what we found was that there was a lot of absence of in the community. There was a lot of situations where the fathers were absent from the sporting events, from a lot of the events that were happening in the weekends, and that was very disruptive for family life. And so that was something that really alerted us to the problems of the new shift arrangements, which are very complex, but they seem to be very disruptive in terms of community and family lives. And also the growth of the big donga camps, which were the women were complaining about in terms of the safety for children, and we later found out in the report that that a lot of the women are finding it quite unsafe to be in those donga camps as well.
Well, what were the key findings then, David?
Well, one thing was the big week that workers are working. They're working long hours, amongst the longest hours in the country these days compared to the past. And a lot of workers are wanting to work shorter hours than what they're working, around about half. And they're working these rotating shifts, mainly rotating 12-hour shifts, and workers are also split in their views on that. There's quite a few, maybe half of them would be saying, well, we're happy with the arrangements we've got, and the other half are saying, actually, I'd rather be going back to day shift, but they don't really have much choice. So they're telling us that with the current shift, that's better than the alternative shift they might have been working in a different mine or something, but the feedback we're getting in the open-ended comments is much more negative about the shift work. So you've got these really complex views about shifts, and there's no single pattern to the shifts or to people's views about them. It's a very mixed picture that we're getting. And
of course the impact that it must have on people's families.
Yeah, exactly. What I found was the most startling piece of information from the survey was the fact that the workers were saying that they had very little control over what they worked, when they worked and how they worked, and that actually impacted on their physical and mental health. And so they were more prone, if they said that they had little control, which a lot of them did, then they were more likely to have a very serious impact in terms of their health, which of course is depression.
So the mining and energy workers we interviewed reported much less say in the hours that they worked, their start and finishing time, how long the shifts were, what type of shifts they were in, much lower say than workers we've interviewed in other industries by a long way. And this combination of working more hours than you want to and not having say over your hours, over your shifts, is something that seems to be having these negative impacts flowing through into the household, into the family and things
into the community. The fact that the communities are often devoid of men for children over certain periods of standard periods. Like people complained in the survey about not having their rights, and their right to Christmas, being there in the weekends, being there, the things that you take for granted. And they just weren't able to do that, and that is very difficult. But it's also very difficult for women miners who are actually having to bear a lot of the brunt of the domestic work, and for their partners as well, and that they're not getting the support. And if women partners are not getting the support of their men because they come home too emotionally tired, which they say they do, then they're more likely to be depressed and suffer from symptoms of illness as well.
And this is only the first stage of the report?
Yes, that's right. Because there's a lot of issues you just can't investigate in a cross-sectional survey. Now, this is the biggest survey that's been done of this type. 2,500 members, 1,900 of their partners. So that's a big survey. But you can't just ask people to single point in time questions and work out all the answers. You've got to follow them up and see how things change. And that's how you understand what's the impact of FIFO or drive in, drive out, of the different types of shift arrangements and so on. So we're going back into the field in the middle of 2013 to survey the same people again. It's really important that we get those responses because that's how we can better understand what's affecting workers in the industry and what are the best, what could be the best outcomes for them.
And ultimately, what are you trying to achieve? Better outcomes for the industry?
Well, that's right, and that's you don't know what you want unless you collect the data, and that's how we understand how do these things affect health, how do they affect psychological well-being, how do they affect family relationships. So the project is only part way through, and this is just the early findings from the first phase of it, really.
Thank you, Georgina and David, for joining me. And of course, if you would like more information on the report, go to the CFMEU website.